Hi, this is Sarah Edge with my week three reflections for the Cutrone and Bauman readings. I feel like I could have spent probably 2 or 3 weeks studying this stuff because I'm super new to teaching theater and I haven't been in a play in about 30 something years. So pretty much everything was new that was in the chapters. So I'm probably going to have to go over them again over Thanksgiving break and really get everything penned down that I need to do in order to make sure everything is effective when we come back from Thanksgiving break and we really get rolling on our play. Chapters 14 and 15 were about how to make rehearsals effective and about how to work with the actors for developing characterization. One thing that I found to be particularly useful was the idea of setting goals twice for each rehearsal. So once at the beginning, um, I likened it to writing the objectives on the board in a classroom, which I've been always wants you to do. But it does give the kids an idea of what they need to be working on and whether or not they've achieved success. So, and it sets the tone for the rehearsal. So, setting the goals for what's going to happen during the rehearsal, and then at the end of the rehearsal, setting a goal for the next time that you meet so the students know what they need to work on in between the end of this rehearsal and the beginning of the next rehearsal, and to keep everything flowing is a good idea to do that. And then it also brings closure where we can all come together and talk about what happened and then set the goals together. Um, Something I really struggle with in my it shows up my evaluations for the last couple of years is closure when I'm teaching art. Um, so I think this is a really good way to do it, and I'm going to apply that in my art classroom too. Is hey, let's meet, for the last 2 or 3 minutes of class in art, probably more like 5 for the rehearsals, maybe even 10, uh, and set some goals for how we can move forward and what we need to work on. So I really liked that idea. So I'll be carrying that into my rehearsals. Um, the chapter also 14 also went over some characteristics of good leaders. So you should just assume that you have the position of authority, and usually the kids will follow. I like that one. It helps me if I act like I'm the leader because I have imposter syndrome really bad. So sometimes I have to play the part of the confident director, even though I feel like I have no idea what's going on. I think most teachers have felt that way at some point or another. Um, but being flexible, being prepared, because kids can see right through it if you're not prepared and you're not going to make the progress that you need to without a plan. I'm a huge planner. Being able to learn from others, being sensitive to the needs of your actors and your crew members. One thing that I liked from the chapter was they made sure that you need to be conscientious to give every student some attention, some individualized attention and praise and constructive criticism. Um, they said that praise is the most effective, or positive reinforcement is the most effective way to get the behavior that you want or get the progress that you want. We hear that in teaching all the time. And then even like I used to be a server, and um, they would say for every one bad review a restaurant or business gets, they need at least 10 good reviews to help um, appease the customer base and get the customers back that they would have lost from the one negative review. So, yeah, positivity is really important in reinforcing the behaviors you want to see. I like the idea of setting up different deadlines for different parts for memorization. So we're chunking it. That's something that shows up a lot when you're breaking down tasks for younger students or for IEP students, especially who might not be able to break things down on their own. It's a good life skill to teach. It's something that I have to do with myself with my neurospicy brain, and that my husband has to do. He's got ADHD, so we have to break things down into manageable chunks so that it's not so overwhelming in our house. And I know a lot of students do that too. But if we chunk everything down and have realistic deadlines for when to have lines memorized, I think that'll be helpful for everybody. And I like the idea of not using rehearsal time for memorization. That's something that we did in my drama club last year, and nobody learned their lines. They didn't take it very seriously. I think they just were like, "Oh, we'll do it during rehearsal," and then we never got to doing good blocking or polishing the play, and it looked very chunky. But that was my first try, so I think being able to incorporate the information from the book is going to be a huge help. There's so much. So the last 2 chapters of the Cutrone were about blocking. So the first one was about creating emphasis, which is something that I do all the time in art. I teach my students how to arrange a composition that they're making, like a painting or a drawing or even a sculpture, to create emphasis on whatever is important, whatever they want the viewer to really look at. So one way that we do it in art that was also mentioned later on in the book is like focus lines. So like imaginary lines that direct the viewer where you want them to see. So they're not lines that are actually drawn, but you can create them by gestures like pointing or having people in your artwork looking a certain way. You can direct certain colors or lines pointing at whatever you want to create emphasis about. And then it doesn't have to be a direct line. One of the ways that they were talking about in the book for creating focus, the characters, you could have all the characters look directly at the focal point, or there's another, I can't remember what they called it. I'm looking. Indirect focus. Sorry, I lost that for a minute. Indirect focus, which is where you can have some of the characters looking at the intended focus, and then you might have a couple that are looking in a different direction, but they'll be looking at something that creates another line that points back to whatever you want the main focus to be. And that's something that happens in art as well. So the example that I could think of off the top of my head was the painting of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. So if you look at the Last Supper, Jesus is in the middle and most of the disciples are looking directly at him, but directly to his right is Mary Magdalene. She is not looking at him. She's kind of snuggling on the guy who she's next to, but he is looking directly at Jesus. So you create like this kind of like circular flow of movement of the eye back to Jesus. And then on the other end of the table, there's a group of, I think, 3 disciples. They're looking at Jesus. And then if you go further down to the end of the table, there are a couple of people who look like they're arguing about money or something with the guy who's on the very end of the table. So they're looking at the guy at the end of the table, but he's pointing back to the center of the table, back to Jesus. So all of the focus eventually comes back to the center, even though you're looking throughout the composition. So that's something that I can think about and definitely apply when I'm doing the blocking in my plays, because I'm used to training students to be able to see that way for visual art. So if I can apply that knowledge that I have to creating a composition on stage, I think it'll be really effective, and it will be so much better than the indirect, excessive blocking that I did last year in drama club, where I was just having actors move around because I thought the more movement that was going on, the more interesting it would be for the audience, and it probably had the absolute opposite effect, and it just looked like utter chaos, which is probably why I got a scathing review from a local actor. Yeah, the chapters are very useful, and I'll be way more deliberate in blocking, and I think less is more, at least to start out. So I'm going to start working on blocking later this week. I've got an informational meeting with parents and students tomorrow. Printed out a sign with all the information. I'm working on my informational packet to pass out as soon as I'm done with this video. And then we're going to have auditions the following week. So I'm working on making the informational, the interest form, and figuring out when the kids have conflicts so I know who to cast, because if you can't show up for rehearsals, then you definitely can't be a lead in the play. I've got a cheerleader who's really mad at me about that right now. Anyway, I think I talked way more than 5 minutes. There was just a lot. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful night. Bye.